Hi guys, so today I'm going to be talking to you about the philosophical concept of can we really know anything for sure? So this concept was introduced by French philosopher Rene Descartes in the 17th century, and it was basically introduced because Descartes wanted to find a way to restructure how we think about philosophy, and he wanted to do that with a method of doubt. So he started by questioning all of the knowledge that we take to be um true for sure. So I have a couple examples that I want to give for this. The first example is if we can think about like math. So if you ask anybody, 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can ask them in a different language. You can ask in sign language. Like anybody will tell you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. But what Descartes wants to question is how do we know that 2 is really 2? Because in order for 2 plus 2 to be 4, then 1 plus 1 needs to be 2. So how do we know that 2 is actually 1 plus 1? And we start boiling all of that down to that basic question of how do we know? Like, how do you know? And another thing that I like to question is also like basic events. Like do you know that you woke up this morning? How do you know that you brushed your teeth this morning? How do you know that you drove your car to work? Like by the time you get there, all you really have is the experience, the memory of having lived that event. So even though you know like to yourself and you can tell other people, Descartes basically questions that existence or that fact like as a whole. And this whole concept of questioning everything around you is called radical doubt. And radical doubt kind of leaves everything around us up to question besides ourselves. So this is where that really famous statement, Cogito ergo sum, in Latin, direct translation, I think, therefore I am. And this is really famous for a great reason, which is that it's a really interesting argument. And it all draws from the fact, like what I said earlier, that you can prove everything around you. Sorry, take that back. You can't prove everything around you. But can you even prove yourself? Like, you know that you're real to yourself. How can you prove that? So Descartes says that when you say I think, I is like the self, yourself. You're saying, I am thinking so that I know that I'm real. And you can think that no matter what. So when we start tackling like the concept of the self, because that's a super big factor in this whole theory, you want to focus on the fact that I is like, it can apply to anything. And this is where I think these like critical issues come in. So if I say I, and I'm talking about myself, I'm thinking. So if I think of like anything, whatever, an elephant, I'm thinking of an elephant. If I'm able to produce that thought and I'm able to consciously think, and if doubting is just another form of thinking, if I'm able to doubt, then I must exist. That's basically the argument. But let's say you have two people in a room together, right? So I'm sitting with my friend and I say, well, I'm thinking and, I'm talking, so therefore I must exist. But how do I know that you exist? And my friend goes, well, I'm thinking and I'm talking, so I must exist too. But the only versions of ourselves that are truly real, according to Descartes and this whole philosophy, are the perceptions of ourselves to ourselves. So even though my friend is like, I think, therefore I am, her existence is outside of my existence to myself. So I can't prove that through this philosophy because I am not her I. It gets really confusing at this point, but that's the best way that I can explain it. And that like key issue in there is that we are focusing on the sole concept of thought, like only about thinking rather than what is this concept of the self. Because when you start getting into that, you start getting into different fields like psychology, because when you think about yourself and you look in the mirror and you go, this is me, right? You're seeing your face, your hair, your body, but you're not seeing what you would call you, because everything that you think, everything that you process, everything that you remember is all stored in your brain. It's not stored in what you look like. So if you really want to start defining like I, you have to start there with the concept of the self. Like you have to prove that you exist, but how do we define you? And I say that because if you want to apply this argument, like I think, therefore I am, how do we make sure that it's not applied to other life forms? Because there are other carbon-based life forms on Earth that don't process or think as complexly as humans do, but they still have these thoughts. Like a fun example that I have is like blades of grass. So if you've ever been near a freshly mowed lawn, you know the smell, and it's like a really weird smell. I don't like it. But if you didn't know, that smell is actually when a blade of grass is cut, it releases that smell into the air as basically a warning system to alert all of the other grass that death is basically coming. And if you think about that, that is a concept. It's a thought. They're not speaking. They are thinking, hey, I just died. Like, here's a thought. So are we also saying that the grass can prove its existence to itself because it's thinking? I don't know. That gets a little bit confusing. I really think this whole concept is super interesting because it is tackling the basic existence of everything around us and even ourselves. And I do think it does get a little bit dicey and it can kind of turn into a spiral because we basically live our lives with the concept that everything exists, because if we start deconstructing everything around us, that's a surefire recipe to start going crazy. But before Descartes, even Aristotle did say that doubt is the beginning of wisdom. So when you're born, you know, you don't come out of the womb like doubting things. Like when you're born to your mother, and she's taking care of you and feeding you, you're not thinking, hey, is this my mother? Like, should I be doubting her role as my mother, her existence as a person? That's not where we start off, because it's not really a survival skill or anything of utmost like relevance, but it is a really fun thought experiment and definitely something to consider, especially like I said earlier, when we start moving into fields like psychology, because there are mental states such as schizophrenia that alter your perception of reality. So what's real to someone that has schizophrenia is not exactly real to someone who doesn't have it. But then we start going into the definition of what is real. Like we have our perceptions, we have what's actually real, and then we have Descartes' screwed up universe where nothing actually exists at all. So bringing that all back to the very beginning of the video, can we really know anything for sure? The answer is no, but it's important to take that with a grain of salt because you can't start unraveling everything around you and also yourself without being sure and being careful. But I hope that I made the concept of cogito ergo sum very clear through this video. I hope the reasoning was very solid, and I hope that you enjoyed watching my video essay on Descartes.